So thank you everyone for joining the Scratch leaders, Laura, Anya, Peter, and Richard. We're going to talk about how we keep our category leadership if we're in the incumbents and how we nibble at their feet if we're not in this webinar where AI answers are leading the discussion. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover, we'll do a quick intro on us and why we're wasting your time today. We'll talk about 5 reports that were major inspirations for the different sections that we have. I'll set the stage, which hopefully is not going to be a surprise to anyone, but I think we have an interesting slant on how we look at the LLM journey. So hopefully that would be refreshing for you guys. Then we'll go through kind of how demand gen is changing. We've had multiple discussions around that in various different groups, and I know this is a topic that's key to everyone's heart. How the heck do we build pipeline in this new world? We'll talk about content and some of the new rules around that. Anya's going to talk about PR and what that means, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So let me introduce us quickly. Scratch is a B2B tech marketing agency. We're an integrated full funnel agency. We have been in business, this is year 17, and we keep going. And I'm super excited to have 3 of my favorite people on the line because these are the folks who are setting the strategy for our clients. In terms of the kind of the people that we work with, this just gives you a sense of we're tech, B2B tech PR agency. That's what we do, PR, marketing, demand gen. So that covers the gamut. Just to give you a sense of some of the companies that we have helped towards strategic exits, that's usually what we're good at. Some of you are on the line as part of these strategic exits, so thank you guys for joining us on that journey. A little bit about the team. Richard heads up our content, Anya heads up our PR practice, and Peter is part of our demand gen practice. And what's unique about this team is that we are talking to different clients. We are part of multiple different communities. So hopefully what we'll bring you today is an outside in view into what we're seeing and some of the practices that are forming. If someone tells you that they have figured out how to navigate this new LLM world, I keep saying they are lying to you. We're trying to figure it out as we go, but we're going to share what we're seeing kind of from the latest research, what we are seeing in discussions, and then what we're seeing in client environments today. The reports that we're going to be talking about, all of these are super interesting. Anya is going to talk about the McCrack report and kind of the role of PR. I'm going to talk a little bit more, and then Peter and I and Richard are going to focus on the voice of the buyer from our friends at Infuse. This is a particularly interesting read because it does set the stage for especially enterprise buyers. The research is global, it's larger companies, and Infuse took stock of the market, which they do every year. The winter research is interesting for us in marketing because it shows how we, on the CMO and the CRO side of things, are buying. The 6 Sense report that Carrie Cunningham put together end of last year is also super interesting read. You'll have access to all of these reports. And last but definitely not least, one of our favorite vendors is Trendemon. Think of them as a website personalization technology, but they have a very unique approach in data generation. So what we did was jointly analyzed all of these interactions that happened through the platform in 2025, and we're bringing you some of these signals and what we're seeing coming next. I'm super excited about this report, obviously close to the Scratch's heart as well. Okay, so I'm going to set the stage around what's happening with the LLMs, and I'll start with this. I think that the incumbents in any category have the most to lose and the most to defend. So if you think about, when we become a category leader, we usually outperform and outspend everyone because we had multiple hooks in the market. Usually we have big budgets, we have partners that support us. So that used to be kind of the mode that we have, and it's really hard to dislodge an incumbent once you're there. So the question is, though, are we still there, and are the rules changing? And I think what we're seeing, maybe to a certain extent, this is good news to everyone on this call, is that the cards are being reshuffled. And we, for the first time, have an opportunity to have an almost even level playing field as the large companies, because buyers are definitely in the driver's seat. So the lens that I want to bring to you guys is when we look at LLMs, we're not just looking at how many times did we show up for these particular queries, but we look at this as a lens, as a GTM lens, essentially. Brand benchmarking is changing. We can see sentiment. We can see what attributes we are really ranking for or being perceived for, seen in the market from multiple different sources for the first time with almost no money spent against it. And we can see the same for our competitors. We can think differently about switching campaigns that we run on the demand gen side. We can think about how we change perception around attributes with paid PR and content. You can get insights into your ecosystem. Who else can you play with, not just to cross-post blog posts so that you can make sure that you rank for this particular query, but you actually get a bigger access to the market. So that's kind of the lens that we have on AEO that we haven't seen very many people adopt. And we're still asked the question, who should own AEO within an organization? And it's a good question. Depending on the organization, what we're seeing is that sometimes it falls under content and web, sometimes it falls under SEO, sometimes it's the PR teams who lead it. But ultimately, hopefully, you guys will agree that this needs to be led from the top. And I would say the executive team and definitely the CMO as kind of the lead for that. So sort of the idea of you need to be on the defense and offense, I think, on both sides of the equation, we have an opportunity to do some real damage these days through the insights that we get with the LLM. So the question is, kind of where do we go next? This is my favorite slide from the Infuse Voice of the Customer data, because guess what? Again, they polled globally enterprises, and it used to be that switching from one brand to another was super difficult. Guess what? Not anymore. The market is in transition for sure, and it's a huge opportunity for incumbents to defend their moat, and then for challenger brands to go after them. And some of the things that we need to heed are on the over-promising and the under-delivering. I think we can all agree that this is happening across the board. The other thing that kind of is changing, which is again insights from my friends at Infuse, multiple folks who we really, really respect, is that this brand familiarity actually makes a ton of sense. And one of the things that we are changing in our demand gen playbooks is we're no longer waiting for intent to hit so that we can then target accounts. We're trying to get ahead of a market, because guess what? If you're the first brand now with actual proof, you need to be early to compete and win. So that's sort of the idea and the change of like the intent signal is great, then you can customize middle and bottom of the funnel. But if you want to win the game, you have to play the long game. And that means getting ahead of the market, which means not only from a demand gen and content perspective, but also from a PR perspective. So you could argue we're getting back to basics, the way things used to work in a way. But it's refreshing to see some of that. So, you'll see that we'll talk about the category leaders can become the default, but not the definition. Good example of this is if you see the whole new crop of companies that are positioning themselves as an anti-CRM solution, completely trying to change, our idea of what CRM is and what Salesforce used to be. So, we have an ability to change as kind of the market is changing, and we have an ability to go and advocate as we develop new ways of thinking, and as LLMs and buyers are redefining the categories essentially. So if you're going with generic positioning now more than ever, I think, and you see that pretty much all of us are advocating for the same thing, you're not off on a good start, and you won't probably end up where you want to be. So if your positioning holds its shape and it's meaningful and it's practical, and it's informed by what the market and the buyers are doing, then you win. Okay, so on that note, we wanted to bring you a practical sort of GTM playbook. And at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Peter, who's going to talk about how demand gen is changing. And rather than you guys looking at me and saying, I'm going to click on the next slide and then the next slide, I'll let Peter share his screen and do his magic from here. We can, but we can't hear you.
Of course, more than one button. So the unmute is working now. So thanks everyone for joining. I have about 10 slides here. So in the interest of time, I'm going to be covering each slide in about a minute. So a lot to cover, but we want to stay on time. So please list your questions in the chat and we can take them up in the Q&A session. So this is an early peek in the new research that Lora referenced. By the way, we are doing a follow-on webinar with our partners at Trend Demon, where a lot more of this will be disclosed. I guess I need to be in full screen for you to even see it.
Thank you. I was just going to say it.
But what do we know from that research? I mean, we all know AI is now a meaningful acquisition channel, and the growth in the use of LLM referred traffic to websites is tremendous. Now, mind you, from a somewhat low base, and what we're seeing is that the sessions per account are flat, which means you get more and more visits per account. The traffic drop we are all familiar with. Organic and direct traffic is down across the board. A lot of people are panicking, especially if they relied on conversions from organic or direct. At the same time, the trend should be that your conversions are improving from organic and direct channels, because effectively what should be happening is you're transferring the education to outside of your properties, to the LLMs. In some ways, you're weeding out the window shoppers or the tire kickers. So things to watch out for is, what is your engaged session profile, percentages, and how much of this lower organic or direct traffic is actually engaged and valuable. Make sure you look at your bot traffic, because this is kind of a double-edged sword. As if your stuff is valuable, more and more bots are scanning it, so it may be skewing your data. But the big takeaway, the education and awareness is moving outside of the organic and direct channels, and not only to LLMs, but as the study will show, email and paid channels as well. Another early peek in the data here, and this is based on research of CMOs buying software, but it can be very easily sort of extrapolated to any executive level buyer, decision maker. So there's three seismic shifts here. Massive increase in the use of LLMs for vendor discovery, from 24% last year to 84% this year, 3.5x. 65% of vendors are starting their searches in peer communities. Now, this finding is obviously moving us back into the private, gated, walled worlds of influence outside of the LLMs. But that's where you effectively are probably having either secret ambassadors and influencers, or not so great things being said about your offerings. So figuring out how to influence the influencers to these communities is also key. And finding number three, people come to sales calls way more prepared, having done their homework. 80% arrive at these moderately or fully familiar with the vendor. So in terms of the LLM-driven buying journey, credibility is absolutely the new sort of conversion event, if you will. And the categories here kind of open up a whole lot of avenues for thought and strategy formulation. But when you start with what is the most important factor in shortlisting a vendor for evaluation. So strong alignment with our use case, technical requirements, and existing technology stack. This sounds extremely customized. So if you think about, what do I need to feed a model or hope that the model picks up so that customized analysis can be done earlier on and I can be shortlisted, these are the types of questions that need to be answered. And this type of content needs to be created in order to feed that engine. The next set of things are kind of in the same group, right? But the interesting ones are demonstrated ROI or business value, and a little further down, quality of customer references and case studies. So if a model is now the new recommendation engine, how do you feed the ROI? Do you have ROI calculators? Are these kind of coming back? What is the information that a model can pick up to assist a searcher or a buyer in coming up with ROI calculations? And then on the flip side, in terms of reviews and testimonials, what do we have out there that a model can pick up and serve to someone who's looking? So in many ways, the models are the new recommendation engines. and we need to figure out how to use the star ratings, if you will, there. Just a super quick mention. I'm sure a lot of us, especially those of us in the SaaS space, probably saw that Gartner sold the entire group of their recommendation engines to G2. So Capterra, GetApp, Software Advice, all changed owners. And we can debate why that happened. But if you think about the old way of capturing influence and recommendation and star ratings and product comparisons, this is shifting completely. And anecdotally, Gartner sold them at fire sale prices after a bunch of reported layoffs. So it's an interesting question as to what is the role of these recommendation platforms. And we can discuss whether they open or close, whether the LLMs can scrape them. What's the future of that? Obviously, by some reports, 30 to 40% of AI citations for SaaS-related searches are still referencing these legacy recommendation engines, if you will. So how do we build credibility in 2026? Big takeaways. Most deals are effectively decided by way of shortlisting before the sellers are ever contacted. The vendor ranked first at the end of the selection phase usually goes on to win 80% of the time. So absolutely key question. How are you going to get shortlisted? At the same time, buyers are engaging vendors earlier. So the earlier stages of the funnel are shortened. 61% of the journey happens before the first contact versus last year's 69%, according to this data. But the decisions ultimately still hinge on sort of the selection and the validation criteria down funnel. Interestingly, relationships still matter enormously. So 80% of the buyers, 85% of the buyers report the prior experience with the winning vendor, and 75% say that personally know the sellers. So should this, or is it driving a shift in sort of sales mentality or demand gen mentality? How many of us are abandoning or ignoring prospects that are not currently in market? And if we do that, do we lose the opportunity to build a relationship in the long-term game where we can influence a decision further down the road? And then absolutely revenue teams, marketing and sales together must adapt to win before that first conversation happens by way of being shortlisted. On the next slide, some data on the global averages, nothing surprising here, but total buying cycle, 10 months. Now, most of the stuff here is kind of a higher ticket pricing. So like you'll see in the middle of the table, 300K or 200K are the respective averages for these data points, but still. Point of first contact with the sellers, 61 versus 69. And vendors evaluated, slightly higher than last year, but closer to 5. So if we go over to the next slide, what are people actually using the LLM the LLMs in the buying journey for? And there's a lot of interesting stuff here that each sort of comes with a strategic decision as to what to do next. So the comparison of vendor offerings, absolutely, we talked about it. This is the new comparison engine, the new recommendation engine. Evaluating proposals and RFPs is actually a very interesting one in terms of what needs to actually be in an RFP submission to influence an AI-assisted decision. So people may be using an LLM, they may be using, I don't know, a Google Notebook LM, or any other tool to summarize submissions of RFPs and proposals. And then you get into things like summarize third-party content, create vendor shortlists, so decision criteria. But further down, forecast timelines and risks and simulate total cost of ownership models. So people are asking the LLMs to do these projections for them. And we need to start thinking about, do we have data out there to provide an answer? And this may seem very mathematical and black or white, and it actually isn't. So a lot of thought needs to go into how do you influence a potential financially driven decision that a model is going to create for someone else. And then the analysis of reviews and testimonials is an interesting one. Obviously, the LLMs are scraping the G2s and the Capterras of the world and all of these sources together with Reddits and wherever else people would put comments around your products. But now volume is no longer a barrier. For many of us where it was like, I can't get to all of these sites and adjust my ratings or do reviews and all of this, and probably doesn't matter because not everybody's going to go to all of these places. This is gone as a barrier, right? All of them are scrapable and analyzable at the click of a button. So everything matters, perhaps. And so the three things to know about the LLM-driven journey. They're obviously widely used within the buying journey. 94% report they're using them. They're not replacing the vendor interactions, though. So back to the relationship point that we made. Vendor buyers are still reporting double-digit interactions with each vendor, 16 or so, right? And high-stake purchases will require direct validation. We are perhaps some way away from an AI agent completing a high-value purchase. But make no mistake, a significant part of the research and the decision, criteria, recommendations, factors, takes place in the LLMs prior to anything else. And so the early peek into the new research, this is from our friends from TrendDemon. Again, we have an upcoming webinar on this. Conversion rates have grown. And this is mostly because AI has filtered out the noise. In other words, the window shoppers have gone to the LLMs. They're no longer on your website necessarily. And so the good side of this is that those that are coming organically and direct are already prepared and ready to go further down. In terms of sort of what are the clear mandates for the revenue teams from now on? So absolutely need to invest in capabilities to sense, interpret, analyze, and act on these buying group signals that are coming from the models. Content, a lot of implications. Richard's going to talk about this, but self-serve, high value. Think about the prompts. What would somebody ask a model? And would they find an answer for it for your offering? So consider answer-led journeys, which is what TrendDemon actually provides, which is the ability to do this on your website. And we can speak more about this. Equip the sellers to build the preferences and measure actually how often you get to a short list and win rates. With that, I'll turn it over to Richard to talk to us about sort of the implications from a content perspective.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So what we heard from Peter and what we're seeing is that the buyer journey has definitely changed because of LLMs, and that is affecting content as well and how people consume that. But one thing that is not changing is content is still that touch point where buyers, prospects, analysts, and now the LLMs are exposed to and engage with your messaging and thought leadership. So it's still a critical, important piece of the equation. And in some ways, I think it's actually more important with the advent of LLMs. So Bill Gates famously put together his essay 30 years ago now and talked about how the internet was basically democratizing publishing. So anybody could become a publisher, get their voice out. We saw the large, essentially the incumbents sort of take that democratization back a little bit because of the way SEO worked and everything. Now I think we're seeing more of that come back with AI. And so as we're talking about the challengers and incumbents essentially being on the same playing field because of how AI is looking for its answers, that brings us back to one of the core premises that Bill Gates was talking about 30 years ago. So things change, things stay the same. And where content is concerned, it's still that key piece that we need. Now, one of the things that we've seen with LLMs and the advent of sort of ubiquitous AI is the commoditization of content. So anybody can produce pretty decent content in almost no time. The trouble is a lot of that content is very similar. So it's created a sea of sameness out there. And with the LLMs looking for answers, when they go to that content, if they can't find something differentiated or something that they want to bring forward into their answers there, you're going to sink into that sea of sameness. And so you could be producing a ton of content and not having the impact that you're looking for. So we'll go through some of the data from these reports because I think it really points to what is changing in the content funnel essentially here, or the content journey. And so we know that buyers are doing more of their research. They're coming in informed to your site. They're not necessarily doing that there. Peter mentioned that a lot of times they're looking at peer content or peer sites to start that journey. But what we're seeing from the research from Infuse is that they're consuming more content. So that's a good thing. Now, what that means for your content in the mix is a little bit nuanced here. So if we look at this again from the Infuse study, we find out that the content from vendors is still hugely important. You can see it's the top ranked content that people are consuming. Now, I think this is a little bit misleading here in the sense that I think it's a huge part of it, but where it comes in this content journey is a little bit different. So we are going to see that content potentially fed through LLM queries. But in that case, we're seeing a lot of people are using the summaries and the overviews of the content as opposed to digging down into it. So that's where the lower traffic and things come from. So it's influential in there, but those might not be where we're seeing these people reporting that they're consuming that content because they're consuming an answer. I think what we will see is that we're getting more people consuming content at the later stages of their journey because they're going to brands' websites for validation of what they've found. So they've already done their research, but we all have inherent mistrust of AI. So we're seeing people go to the sites and validate what they've seen. And that's where I think a lot of your owned content is going to come into play. From the winter study, we have an interesting gap here. So we are seeing that people prefer to buy self-serve, but they are more often going sales led. So what that gives us is this gap. So buyers are essentially identifying that, hey, I'd like more options to engage with your content. I'd like more ways to do my own work before I'm engaged with sales, which aligns with what we've seen in the journey change. And so what that really brings us to is, how do you do that? So we know that these people have interacted with content. They not necessarily yours. It could be any third party. It could be yours. It's going to be a mix through the LLMs and their research. But then when they reach your site, they have higher intent. So how do you continue that journey, take advantage of that higher intent, and make it pay off? And so one of the ways you can do it is with contextual personalization of that content journey once they reach your site. So in the past, you might have had someone come to your site. They consume a piece of content. You have some options for them to move on, but it's basically standard regardless of who you are and where you're going to go. What we can do now is actually use the context of how they're coming in, what they're talking about or asking on the site, and then provide a customized content journey for each buyer, each visitor. And then that's going to help with that engagement uplift that we're seeing here. The other piece we can do with Trend Demon is the answer-led journeys. And so in that case, we take our content on the site and give it to visitors in the same way that they're interacting with LLMs and other things. We put a way in there for them to quickly get answers, summarizations, and take that LLM style journey and bring it into the content on our site. And we get to define what that content is going, or what content is going to be used in those answers. But now someone can come and get that immediate answer they're looking for on the site, because people are not here necessarily to read or dig in. They want those answers. They want them quick. That's why people are turning to LLMs, and we can give them that same experience on our site with our content. So how do you make your content stand out in this era where we see a lot of sameness, a lot more volume? And the key is to focus on the signal. We need messaging ideas that want to appeal to both our readers and the LLMs. We can never forget that the content is ultimately for the human users that are going to get there and read it. But what we want to do is come up with messaging and present it in a way that cuts through the LLM summarization. So it stands up to that. So a message that's going to resonate once it goes through that process of sort of distillation. And so some of the ways we can do that are to focus on keys that we've known for a while, but are now becoming, I think, even more important in the LLM era. And one of those is a point of view. So content without a point of view is inherently bland to some extent. But having that point of view and carrying that point of view through all your content, being consistent, putting that out there can help it stand out. People want a point of view from a vendor. They want to get advice. They want to know what their thoughts are. So definitely get that out there and into your content. The other thing here we've known for a long time is we want to put faces on our content. So brand content tends to be mistrusted. Putting faces, your subject matter experts, executives, anybody who we can put on that content as the provider helps to humanize it, make those connections, and helps to build more trust. And then one of the other really important things is how we validate and prove what we're saying. So that's where you want to really look for something, especially from a research or insight standpoint, that other people don't have. You want something that is going to be uniquely yours. It's going to be something, especially if it can be quantifiable as in data, that LLMs are going to eat up, because they want to then be able to provide that answer to someone when they ask a question. So the more that your content has that validating data in it, the more it's going to stand out in the LLM world. And then the final thought I'll leave you with here is to build a content system and not a factory. So a lot of people that we talk to about this think, okay, I've got to have a lot more content. There's so much out there. It's expanding. We just need to build and build and build. And this is where we see people also turning to LLMs as a way to fill that. But what they're doing is not adhering to what we talked about here and focusing on these key areas that help you stand out. And so what they're doing is essentially deepening that sea of sameness and not creating something that's going to help them reach the goal that they're going for. So stick to good, strong content. It's still king, and it's going to win in the end. And next up, we've got Anya.
Right, PR. Let me figure things out really quick. All right, so let's go through the PR. So amazing thoughts that Laura, Richard, and Peter already shared. I heard a lot about credibility, and as you know, PR's #1 job, right, is awareness and credibility. Our job is to make sure people who need to know about us, and that we come off as a credible and trusted organization. So we do reference a couple of reports here. Generative Pulse from Muckrack is an amazing source and shows you exactly how PR is being impacted by LLMs and what we can do to influence it. So the link is here. Once we share the deck with you, you guys can check it out. There are a couple slides here that are interesting, and we also reference another big study that Full Intel, which is a PR agency that is specializing in deep research. And they did a study with UConn where they analyzed conversations and citations around weight loss drugs. Again, it's very consumer focused. But I thought that this 47% of citations in AI responses came from journalistic sources. I thought it was a pretty jaw-dropping stat. It's probably the highest that I've seen in all the data reports that I read about AI and AEO and PR. But I thought it was really interesting, right? So news outlets and other information that use kind of journalistic practices, right? Whether it's blogs or even some of the corporate newsrooms, and resource sections. Again, credibility is the #1, the most important factor here, right? It's the new currency. Again, when citations that AI pick up come from, corporate, university, health networks, associations, I think the most important thing is the structure and again the editorial rigor that they embrace, right, when they produce that kind of content. So the net is that the LLMs do not treat all the content equally, and they do favor that credible sourcing, the structure, the quotes, all the typical kind of best practices that journalists adhere to. And of course, readability matters a lot, right? Like think of Axios, think how they structure their articles, right? How many bullets they have, how many like so what, kind of like the main takeaways. So AI really likes that, right? So when you think about your own newsrooms and kind of how you want to display that content, make sure that you have the classic journalistic inverted pyramid style, right? The most important information goes up top, followed by, details and the nice to knows, date lines, bylines, attributed quotes, all this stuff matters. In the PR content that you produce for third party media publication, but also your own content. Like Richard said, I think the playing field is leveled for everyone to become a publisher. Everyone can have a Substack and different types of outlets to kind of share your insights. And then, the main implication here is that earned coverage can translate into AI discoverability, being in the outlets that that AI tools deem credible, they do get surfaced a lot in those search results. How do I go back? 1 second.
Slide. You just click on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. I was clicking on the space bar. All right. So, what PR teams or corporate communications teams should be prioritizing, right? Try to figure out those AI-friendly publications. You know how a lot of the publishers now have licensing agreements with the LLM providers. Again, like outlets like Axios and the way they structure their content and their storytelling, their news, those things are important. Optimize own media for AI citation. So when you put out press releases out there and bylines and things like that, think bullets, think subheadings, any kind of recency markers and context, and of course avoid the industry jargon because then you're just contributing to that sameness. Having, like Richard said, having a strong and bold point of view that is, informed and differentiated is very important. There are a lot of tools out there that allow you the AEO tools that allow you to kind of monitor how you show up in those results. So pay attention to what publications come up the most, right? Those are your, what we call bullseye publications to target and kind of figure out a strategy for each. We always say, depending on who you're pitching, your pitch and the approach has to be different. So that matters now even more. And then I guess the last important point here is that this board level message that we're striving for is that, quality journalism is a predictor of AI visibility and narrative influence. So the goal is not about how much coverage you generate, but, what coverage you're going to secure that AI will cite. So kind of pay attention to that as you put together your plans and your strategy for 2026. This is an interesting, slide because we wanted to kind of reinforce that there's no single uniform answer for every organization, right? Every organization goes to market differently. Some prioritize partner marketing, some do have a lot of, PR plays because they just have a lot of news worthy events. So this pie chart here, it just shows you how much you can influence and control as to what you have to focus on. But in the end of the day, this all will feed into the AI visibility that we all strive for. And I think that's my last slide. So this is just kind of like the main takeaways. Dominate your bullseye publication. Again, if you're, for example, a cloud management provider, we did a project for one of our clients, like Tech Target, and those type of publications came up a lot. So knowing how to pitch, who to pitch there was very important. Pitch for inclusion and not just announcements. As we know, the news cycles are very short. There are things happening every single day where journalists have to jump from one thing to another. So the shelf life is very short. But if you pitch trend reporters for those type of like evergreen articles that cover trends and stuff, I think that that awareness and that credibility carries a lot more weight. Seed the category language via bylines in outlets that are cited by AI. Again, two motions here, right? Know which outlets are servicing the most, and then of course understanding whether they take contributed content, and then how you can be differentiated so you can show up in those publications. Domain authority still matters. AI does prioritize sources that have a lot of traffic. So think partner marketing, right? Like for example, a lot of our B2B tech clients are, having joint motions with someone like AWS And that does show up in AI visibility. Analyst is interesting. I saw one of the slides that we cited in one of
Infuse.
the, yes, where it was placed pretty low. I think for PR specifically, the implication for PR is that analysts do add this credibility, especially when they get quoted in those trend pieces or even your own announcement, right? But if you can get an analyst to provide you a quote and validate some of your claims, I think that does matter for AI search as well. And the most, sorry, let me sip of water. I think the most important thing, and it's my favorite word for 2026, is discipline, right? Being very disciplined and intentional about monitoring how you show up in those results and what's changing, the conversations are shifting, and then adapting as you go, right? You can't just like do like a visibility project in the beginning of the year and then kind of like think that it's going to stay true. So constantly monitoring and then going with it as you kind of see the new trends and insights show
Two
up.
questions in the chat. So Tori's asking, would love to hear more about how to place meaningful content so the LLMs see it. Maybe I can jump on this one and Anya, you can add anything.
Yeah.
Like this is why we do these LLM audits. And do you remember how Anya talked about the percentage of outside sources? Because sometimes CRN would have a huge implication for you, and it's one of the bullseye publications. So having your content there as a contributed piece makes sense. In other cases, we see, to Anya's point, for example, in the supply chain space, analysts play a huge role, and being included in their blogs and reports makes sense. So the meaningful content placement comes from first identifying where you need to show up and what percentage does that citation source have in terms of outweighted impact. I don't know. This was a very, very confusing sentence that I just said.
But the gist is there.
Right.
I just wanted to, like the Tech Target example that I provided, they don't take a lot of contributed content from outside industry sources, right? It's mostly analysts and their own kind of staff reporters. So there's not a lot of workaround here, right? So what you can do is then figure out who are your bullseye reporters that talk about this specific topic, right? And then really build a relationship with them, figure out what they cover. Is it just news? Is it trends? How they like to be pitched, what kind of what is the strongest offer you can make, right? It's not just the sources and the POV, but maybe it's some data, maybe it's a customer voice, right? It's all about this, strategy and an individualized approach for those bullseye publications.
There's no one answer fits all. And I'm glad Tor states till the end, which means that he heard something useful here. So that's a huge, huge win for me personally.
Oh, and I see a question on the contributed versus news. That's a great question, right? Like we always say to our clients, newsworthy events are very important, right? From like a pure tactical perspective, you probably, if you ever search for anything in LLMs, like press releases do show up a lot. Again, be careful and be balanced, be, smart about it. Don't just flood the market with like announcements every month, right? It has to still be newsworthy. But I think that contributed content is where you have the power to really articulate a strong point of view, and that's how you build credibility. News is mostly for awareness and kind of what's going on with the company, but thought leadership is for credibility.
Yeah. Phil has a really interesting question that opens up the door to an enormous discussion, but let me try and take a crack at it, Phil. So the question is, it seems that second tier, the pay-for-play analysts, might not have more influence, because to Phil's point, they're not behind the paywall and they're leveraging social media like LinkedIn. So, two thoughts on that. The very first one is a debate that we can spend hours upon, and this is the open versus closed nature of the internet, and what information is open versus closed. We all know that any new modern browser or automated browser can be programmed to act like a human and bypass a wall, right? So scraping, either sort of presenting yourself as a regular user or in a more automated way, is probably not a protection. We are yet to see where copyright sort of fights may go, but having something behind a wall or a login is not necessarily protecting it from being seen and analyzed by the LLMs. But that's a massive debate then in terms of what influences what. But I do think you're right that the second tier ones, because they're more accessible, may become more and more valuable. Now, in all the analysis that we've done for clients using various tools to see what are the top 10 influencing sources, we see some second tier analysts pop up, but it's not dominant. It is quite ad hoc.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Steve? Mike Triano, you seem very pensive. Do you have a question? Or you're just frozen?
That's his fault.
I'm here and paying close attention. I guess net, do you feel like you want to broaden things, meaning you want to interact with more sources and get the word out through multiple channels? Or does it make more sense to double down on the publications that you believe to be the most influential? I'm trying to get a mental model of kind of what is the power curve for level of influence on LLMs, and is it flatter than it used to be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would love to get your perspective since you're an investor in the space as well, what you're seeing. But I think what we are saying essentially is we're advocating us figure out what percentage you're going to spend by looking at this holistically first, but you're definitely expanding the sources, right? It's not, so it's kind of your own, what do you want to own on your own site content website, and then what is this mix now? But the mix is expanding to your point, and I think we need a larger lens. What are you seeing from the likes of Brand Light and those? What are they advocating for?
I would say that they don't believe there's a real pattern in a kind of universal rule of thumb. They are, finding that there's a lot of, it depends on the category. I would say they're concentrated in packaged goods, and those tend to be broadly influenced because there's a lot of consumer feedback as well. But I think it's probably category dependent is what they would say, Laura.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're seeing it even in B2B tech spaces. Similarly, no single answer. Yeah.
Frank, how do you raise your hand? You start shouting. That's how we do it here.
Oh, that's fine. No, so the question is like in a related thing, like a PR behavior I've had in previous lives is when we pitch a contributed article, it doesn't get, someone gets inspired, writes a blog, we pitch it as a contributed article, it doesn't get picked up by a tier 1 or a tier 2 publication. And it gets it gets elegantly placed into Dev2 or DZone, or you guys, we've all done this, right?
What's your gripe with DZone?
DZone, or look, it's not, or
come on, DZone is not bad.
Elegantly placed. Look, it's real. It's a real publication. Do you have any sense of the relative value of tier 1, tier 2 versus just these communities? I mean, it is community, right?
Yeah,
right.
I think tiering matters, to be honest,
Yeah.
like based on the industry, right? Like I think that we all can agree that Wall Street Journals of the world and Fortunes of the world are tier, they're mainstream. But at the same time, like if you are in DevOps versus cybersecurity versus, right, you would have your own kind of like what we call top tier trades. You can call them tier 1 or tier 2, but they do get surfaced. That's why I think the discipline of constantly checking and monitoring and prompting those tools and seeing what surfaces, in terms of the publications, and then changing the strategy based on that. But I'm again, maybe because I'm a PR person, but I'm a big believer that any good piece of content or any interesting point of view should be media first. Because that way you can get like an immediate boost of the traffic and credibility and everything else. And then you can post things to your blog and, other channels.
Well, there's always that. Someone gets inspired to write something and you read it and you go, this is certainly something that could be placed.
Yes.
Or it's worth shopping, but it's on the gray zone. Can I ask another question around, page rank and linking and stuff like that? When SEO was all about domain age and domain authority and
Mm-hmm.
page rank and linkages and stuff like that. Do you have any sense of how much the LLMs are taking? Like one of my clients was saying to me the other day, this is going to be a long game. All these other guys have, domains that are 20 years old, and ours is 18 months old, and we're not going to be able to compete. I mean, do you have any sense around, is the LLMs, is it a brave new world, like the rules of PageRank and SEO?
I think, and Laura and Peter and Richard, feel free to chime in, but I think that, domain authority still matters. Again, through the analysis that we've done using those tools, the publications that tend to get cited the most are the ones that have a lot of traffic, right? And domain authority correlates with traffic, with web
Okay.
traffic. The more eyeballs your outlet gets, the higher it's going to rank. And LLMs, there's a correlation, right? They do tend to cite those publications, so I think that still matters. And then I saw a comment from someone, HelpNet Security. Interestingly, HelpNet Security is not easy anymore. They became a lot more selective, and I think that, I think everyone has, and in terms of what they want to publish. And I think because of the AI slop and everything, it's a lot more competitive. But also
Yeah.
look what happened to Ars Technica, right? Like
I was
credibility
going to say,
is
talk about this. Did you guys
that
see
is,
this?
I forgot to mention that, yes, like the main AI reporter at Ars Technica got fired a few days ago because they, and they have their own side of the story, which I thought was interesting and valid, but they ended up, using a quote that was completely fabricated by LLMs.
He
So
ended up, yeah.
yeah, and
Awesome.
it's amazing to see that, that it's not just, no one's immune to that, right? Like credibility is the most important, valuable thing in today's age. So,
Yeah.
whatever you do, whatever you decide your strategy and like what pieces of pie you want to kind of like double down on, right? Like make sure that your sources, your subject matter experts, the data that you provide, verify everything, because once you lose it, again, it's a magnifying glass, right? It's going to spread very fast.
Yeah.
But to your question, like what we're seeing right now is that even sponsored content gets ranked in the LLMs.
Yeah.
So, if you could sponsor a CIO feature, if you're at that level, you're probably better off than placing it in HelpNet Security
I'm
as a
gonna
sponsored feature.
try and sort of tie Mike Traiano's questions with Frank's question, because I think that they get at the core of the same thing. And I think what we've been trying to say all along is there isn't a single answer. There is no more authority on X. The X needs to be defined. And this is where the research on the prompts comes in. This is where the strategy of sort of using the tools to figure out for this prompt or this semantic category, who's influencing and can you get there? And so to Frank's point, patterns are to Mike's point, patterns are very hard to discern and they're shifting. And in some categories, they might be easier. So to Mike's point, in a consumer packaged goods, it's very well defined. And the attributes around the brand or what a buyer will care about may be way more defined than some things that we need to influence in our categories.
Yeah, I would only add that, that's something that came through from our CMO brunch back in November. And I can't remember who said that, one of the presenters, but, the most important thing is not to try to trick, right, this new game.
Peter McCone.
It's not going to work. It didn't work with SEO. It's not going to work here. It's still about long-term value, quality, being intentional, being disciplined, right? Not just, again, flooding the space with the press releases because they do get picked up. Communicate what's newsworthy and important. Not everything has to be an announcement, right? Like sometimes it's a blog post, sometimes it's something else. So just, still being balanced and strategic.
And consistent. That's a big thing, is consistency everywhere. So like we're talking about some sources maybe more valuable than others, but really it's about having that same message across a large number of sources, so that as these LLMs look, they get this consistent message that they can synthesize, and that's how you survive a lot of that summarization and stand out in the answers.
Martha just reminded me that we didn't share kind of the QR codes of the latest research. Well, anyway, we'll make sure that this presentation is available to you guys and you can access all of the various reports, but I wanted to flash them on the screen in case, you want to take a screenshot and access them. easily. Well, thank you everyone for
Yeah, thank
joining.
you, everyone.
We had a lot of fun. So if you have any other questions or ideas for next sessions, by all means, reach out. Hopefully this was useful to everyone. We'll see you soon in the digital and physical sphere of this world.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, team.
Everybody.